Let me introduce you, though, to our experts. With me, Steve West has more than 2 decades of experience helping thousands of organizations make their work life easier through project management as the CEO and founder of Project Insight.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Project Insight is an award-winning online project management tool. Our mission is to automate your work, unify your data, and make your life easier. If you're not currently using our platform, please reach out. We'd love to show you what we have to offer. With Steve, we have Diane Buckley-Alwies. Diane has more than 3 decades of project management experience throughout multiple industries. She's an author, a speaker, volunteer. I'm super pumped we're back. Hey, guys, how are you doing?
Okay.
Doing great. Thanks, Matt.
Wonderful.
And Arizona does have the hot season and the not so hot season.
Yeah, it's true. It's cooling down. It's getting, I was, everybody else in the country would be laughing at me, but I was wearing a jacket earlier. It was, 65, so it's all good.
Well, I think all three of us are living in places that really don't have much seasons. So.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
All good.
Definitely.
Oh, good. Well, welcome everybody. Hi, Steve. Hi, Matt.
You there?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So today, we, as Matt said, we're kind of pulling it all together, taking what we learned over the last 5-6 months. As Matt said, the recordings of those sessions are available to you all. So please feel free to go check them out and review them or review them for the first time if you hadn't been in that 5-part series. But today what we're going to do is we're going to take a lot of that knowledge and we're going to kind of say, okay, now I got my basics. I know my how to put a charter together. I know how to do a stakeholder analysis. I know what risk management is, but things are going to happen. No project ever goes 100% as planned. And if you do have that happen, you're just a rock star. But I've never seen it happen.
Well,
it's a very short project. Very short.
Yeah. Right. I got up out of bed today.
Yeah.
The bigger the project, the more likely you're going to have challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about how to keep things running smoothly. And how to keep things on track. The Project Insight tool provides us a lot of capabilities to make us aware when things are happening that we need to respond to as project managers. So, let's get to it.
Yeah.
All right. So what does running smoothly mean, right? There's a lot of different definitions of that. It could be about making sure we ensure that we're delivering all the deliverables. It could be that we want to make sure the customer's happy because they're the ones that helped us put that charter together, remember? We want to try to meet the schedule as best we can. Things do happen. And, for those of you that have been studied to be a project manager, the whole 3 aspects of time, cost, and quality, those 3 things work together. And it's really hard to keep things on schedule and on budget. So that's why we're here. That's why you have your job. I always tell young project managers, if you get into this role thinking you never have to deal with issues, you're in the wrong role. And also, if you don't like dealing with problems, you're in the wrong role, right? That is our job. If things went perfectly smoothly, we wouldn't have a job. But that's why we're here.
Well, and unfortunately, like you're as a project manager, you're stuck between executives who, can just want to snap a finger and have everything done. And then you got your own team to manage. And then a lot of times you're not directly their manager. So you're, really have a lot of different kind of personalities to work with. That makes it hard.
Yeah. And that's what this whole session is about, is recognizing that those things do happen. And what are some ways to approach it? How should you think about it so you're not getting yourself all stressed out? If the project manager is stressed, then that causes stress to everybody else. That's another thing I always tell young project managers, like, you're the one that has to stay calm. You got to know that things will happen and that there's ways to address those things when they do happen. So if we're talking about scope, again, you want to make sure you're delivering your deliverables. You want to satisfy your client. But things do happen. When we put a charter together, we don't know everything. I mean, when we talk about agile methods and everything like that, it's not expected that you know everything. So because of that pure fact, things will change. So making sure that, recognizing that things will not be 100% defined. And also, too, if you think about it, we define those objectives in our charter. And those objectives are really your, shining star. It's that North Star. You really, the reason you're doing the project is to meet those objectives. So a lot of things can be changing all throughout the project, but if you're constantly focused on those objectives and making sure what you're doing is helping you get to that point, it'll actually continue to help move that whole project forward, and you'll end up with the results you want at the end. Also, to remember that there's lots of ways to achieve those objectives. So let's say, you want to, I'll use you, see, you want to learn how to swim faster, right? There's lots of ways to achieve that objective, right? There's diet, there's exercise, there's certain things you can do, but there's going to be certain ones that help you achieve it greater than others. So they're not all equal. So you might have 10 things to help you achieve that objective, but you've chosen as part of your project scheduling, project planning, that these top 4 are the ones we're going to focus on to make sure we achieve that objective. But the other 6, you're not necessarily going to worry about them, and you're going to kind of, keep them in your back pocket just in case you need them. So there's lots of ways to get there. And, you try and do the same project a year from now, those 10 things may be very different on how they help achieve the goals of the project. So you always have to keep in mind that, scope creep will happen, but what am I doing to ensure that I deliver to the objectives? Like, what are we trying to achieve? What are those goals? Make sure that I'm doing that. And then the other thing too is executives. I think you just mentioned it, the senior level folks are saying,
Right.
well, isn't it done now? Why can't it be done 3 weeks earlier? Or I thought this was included. And there's always going to be some of that conflict that happens throughout a project. So the point here is really, when you're talking about scope creep, really think about the objectives and focus on the things that are going to help you achieve those objectives in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I think it's really important on any major project, or actually all projects, but even more so on the bigger ones, to really bake that in and that expectation that the scope's going to have. And if you have some time or slack built into your project, that's way better than getting into an argument with an executive about it, right? So
True.
if you think, okay, we're going to have some scope creep and we're going to actually accommodate that, and I know there are strategies to accommodate ones beyond what you think is going to be there, but if you have at least some slack in your project plan up front, that helps a lot, helps with the stay calm, because you're you definitely don't want to be in getting into conflict, because then that'll waste even more time.
And if you think about like an agile method, the whole theory is to allow for some of that change. So you do need to think, expect some change, expect some redirection of how you're going to accomplish those objectives, so don't make it so fast and, concrete, so especially, in a waterfall environment, probably a little bit more tight, but in an agile environment, it's kind of expected to be able to adjust as you're going. But that's where I said, you got to keep that North Star. Is like whatever you're doing needs to help you accomplish where you're going.
You got out of bed to get to the office, right? So
Yes.
The way in which you get to the office are many. You could stop for coffee, you could take the shower, you can do many different things, but so long as you keep your eyes on the prize of getting to the office.
Work.
Exactly.
Even if it's in my living room.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Same. Yeah.
Right.
Office, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm actually in a box today, so
Nice.
not in my living room today, so it's all good. So, and then scheduling changes. So one of the things that I think is super important with a tool like Project Insight is the tool needs to let you know when things have changed that you need to pay attention to, because what will happen, there will be tasks that will be underestimated, right? So when somebody ends up taking longer than expected, and again, it's going to happen. I mean, you've got, all different skill sets. One person that may have been doing that task for 20 years and finally you're giving it to somebody new, they're not going to be as efficient as the person that's been doing it for 20 years. So there's going to be things that cause changes in your schedule just naturally. New or incorrect dependencies. Again, one of those things that if you put a plan together, you're making some assumptions. You have to make assumptions to put that plan together. And sometimes those assumptions are right, and sometimes those assumptions are wrong. So I've seen it many times where we thought there was a dependency on something, turns out it wasn't. And then you thought there wasn't any dependency, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, there's 4 other things that have to be accommodated. I was just talking about that this morning with a nonprofit that I work with. She's like, well, we can't just move this date, to do the jurying process, sooner because there's 500 other things that get affected. So knowing those dependencies or interdependencies is really critical, and you're not going to get it perfect. So if for some reason you find out that there's a bad dependency, you can go and fix it. I mean, not everything that happens in a project is not, and this is probably a double or triple negative, is not fixable. Is not fixable. Many things are fixable if you just know it early enough, and that's why the tool is really important. So Steve, do you want to kind of show a little bit of what Project Insight can do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll just start with the one example that you gave, and that if you're working on a single project and you want to know what's overdue, you can just really quickly go over here and say, show me what's overdue. And that'll filter this task list right here to only show the overdue tasks that you can then address them. Because if a task is overdue, either someone forgot to update it or it's behind, like it's not actually done. And then you can go from there. But then also at a higher level, let's say you're just talking on general in your portfolio, we actually have these health indicators that just tell you, hey, you're behind your schedule, you're over your budget. This left column, this health left column, is the one that the project manager gets to set. But these indicators kind of give you a guidance. And the reason we did that was because just because the schedule says it's yellow doesn't mean it really is yellow. The project manager has to make that assessment. But you can see here, this report, these are all the projects in the portfolio. There's a bunch of green ones. We have ones that the project manager said yellow. Similarly, there may be no indicator and you might need to say, hey, this is yellow. I know it's yellow. I'm gonna.
Somebody got sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if they're going to be back tomorrow. I don't know if
Right.
they're going to be able to finish by the end of the sprint.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things you can toss in as yellow, even though it's not showing in the
Right.
software.
And then we have our red category. And by the way, these are just configurable. We just default to green, yellow, red. But a lot of clients will say on track or good for their health, or sometimes it'd be like caution is what they'll
colors.
use. Yeah.
We have some that use colors specifically as
Yeah.
opposed to a name, because names could hurt feelings, but a color is, neutral as far as that's concerned, which I can
Unless you're
appreciate,
colorblind.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah. And then, you're reading code, you're reading the color code or something.
That's right.
Right. And this is really easy to do. And if you want to, when you're on your own project, if you want to change your the health of it, you can do it from the project edit form, and you can also do that. I'll go to the overview and just click on health here, and then you can see actually we show you the indicator next to each of the configurable. These are like on the left here, you'll see this is your health of the project. So if all your project managers and your whole organization have agreed on a standard for doing the health, you can see the health indicator and can use that as a guidance. And this saying, hey, this saying we're behind schedule, this saying we're over budget. I might agree with that. I might disagree with that. And then these are all the extra optional. Most clients just use the main health, but you can also have a breakdown of the health. And that's, helpful for depending on what your executives want to see. Because sometimes executives want to see all of this, and sometimes they just care about the overall. But the easiest way to deal with health is to just go to the overview screen, click on it, and edit it right there.
Yeah, and to come back to, like we're talking about scheduling, it's the tool of, like, Project Insight tool you need it to tell you when things might be off.
Yeah.
And then the project manager, you're responsible for assessing that, evaluating that, determining what action needs to be taken, if any,
Mm-hmm.
and managing that process. So it's really important to have that kind of statusing, like Steve is showing, and let it show it to you, because it's not a bad thing, to see some items in red, because it should be expected.
Definitely.
All right.
Well, you want to know, what you don't want is for everyone to think it's green, but you're really red.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the worst case scenario, because then when the dates arrive, when everyone expects everything to be done, you don't have anything, and then they're like, why didn't you tell us? And
And
it's a
that
lot
really,
better to be just telling people what's going on.
yeah, and the tool can tell you that as long as you build your plan based on dependencies,
Yeah.
right? So if you've built it correctly and you don't put static dates in there, the tool will be able to tell you that. And so that's your best practice that you need to do as a project manager.
Mhm.
The third component that we talked about was with budgeting, resourcing and budgeting. And anytime a schedule is extended, you're almost always going to have some budgeting challenges. And then resources is also, a critical piece. From a budgeting standpoint, knowing the type of resources you're using is going to be important. If you're using lower skilled resources, in theory, that's a little bit cheaper. If you have to go and get, higher skilled resources, that's going to be a little bit more expensive. But then also, you've got resources that move in and out. Very rarely do we have the luxury of only working on one project. So you're sharing resources with a lot of other teams. So resources will move around, and you might end up with, a lower skilled resource, a higher skilled resource. They may go on vacation, they may move around. And that's another way that the Project Insight tool, can provide you great insight into what's going on. You want to show that a little bit too, and then
Sure,
I'll
let's
kind of
go ahead.
summarize that. Go for it.
Mhm. Right. So what you're seeing now is the 10-week capacity report that we have in the tool. And you can see I've got a couple resources. Brett Favre, our quarterback, is over allocated here, and Craig Young is over allocated in the next 3 weeks. And then Emily's good, but then she becomes over allocated. And you can really easily go in and see why by just opening it up, and then this will tell you what projects they're on and how many hours they're they are assigned to those things, so that you can adjust them. And from here
And
you can actually, what's that?
I was going to say, and knowing those people that are under allocated is also
Yeah,
important, right? Because
absolutely. Yeah.
if you've got some
See
over
the
allocated people, then
right,
maybe, check the skill sets. Maybe they can help take on some
right,
tasks.
right,
Delegation is always difficult for people in many cases, but it's like, how can we maybe get somebody else involved and to pick up some of that slack if we see that? And that's the response that you need to look at as a project manager is, what am I going to do if I see somebody's
right,
over allocated or under allocated?
right. And you can come in here and open up and see,
Which
you
tasks?
can drag a task down, and and move. Let's say I wanted to move this to someone who's more
Oh,
free. I
that's
can
cool.
just drag it, and it'll remove that task and gave it to the more free person. So that's just one way that you can reassign people. And the reason this report's important, like what Diane was saying, most people's resources are matrixed across the whole organization, meaning that you don't necessarily always have a dedicated resource. That's extremely common these days. And someone else's project might come online, and then all this, like, you might think, oh, I'm really good, everything's going well. Next thing you know, one of your people's assigned to something else that you have no idea that's going on. Depending on your organization, this report will at least alert you to the fact that whoops, one of my people's busier than I thought they were. Now I
Hmm.
can do something about it.
Yeah.
You you
Yeah,
also have the ability to tie in the other piece that Diane was mentioning, which is budget, right? So all of these people, Adam, Brett, Craig, all have a cost for each of these hours, right? Whether it be the
yeah,
skill set they're doing for that time. So intrinsically, as you're adding and moving those times in Project Insight as well, right? can look at a baseline to see how that's changing, or other mechanisms in the tool to understand how your resource, time allocation is increasing, but your budget is also in
And
the
that
fund.
goes to a lot of the sprint planning, the burn down charts that we've talked about in prior sessions, and just budget trending. There's so much capability of reporting in Project Insight that it's
Yeah.
no project manager should be surprised of something happening on their project. Our job isn't necessarily to be in the weeds with our people. Our job is to kind of be in the weeds in this data, and making sure that things are moving along in the way that we expect it, with the expectation that we are achieving the objectives that we set out to do. So there's that validation that needs to be happening. But a project manager's day should be about, I'm looking at my resources, how are they looking for the next week or so? Do I have any issues? Like looking ahead to make sure that you don't get stuck with a big surprise.
Definitely. I was just going to share one other screen. There's other ways to assign people to as well. If you want to balance your project, there's a Kanban assignment board in here where you can rearrange things. So I can move that back over to Brett Favre just by dragging on this. In these Kanban boards, you can actually, this is something newer we added recently, is I'm actually looking at a specific project, but I can come in and grab additional projects I want to combine with, and have a combined Kanban view of my project, maybe 2 or 3 other projects, to see all the things my people are doing in a Kanban view, as well as the ability to group by, which creates what's called swim lanes in Kanban. So this now has those new abilities. For those of you maybe aren't familiar with that, those were released a couple months ago.
That's cool. Very cool.
It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So come back to our
the other carry on.
Yes, we'll go. All good. It's all good.
You have to stay on schedule for this.
Well, we know what our mission is. We all know what this is. We set out the charter at the beginning. We're going to deliver the whole thing. So we'll get back to it.
That's right. We're going to get back to it. No, it's all good. So from a resource or budget challenge, there's always a chance of losing some resources, or the wrong resources are on your project. The clients also have resources. Now, some and our resources may be dependent on the client applying those resources. So we see that happening a lot too. People get distracted. We mentioned that, but people get distracted on other projects, or maybe they're working on another project and it's not going as well as they expected. So they're ending up having to work harder on that one or longer on that one, which is affecting so I love the idea of being able to look at the different projects overlaid on each other, to see what that overall risk is. And I do love that idea with regard to being able to just kind of drag and drop a task from one resource to another, very simply, very easily. And we talked about the budget, paying attention to those trends. Budget's a little hard to kind of drop if you haven't achieved the deliverables as you're going along, but you have to be monitoring that. And then organizational reprioritization. There's always the chance that your project is now no longer the top priority of the organization, right? So those things do happen, and being able to quickly and easily readjust your calendar, your schedule, your resources, your tasks with the tool like a Project Insight is tremendous. Otherwise, it alleviates a lot of stress, and it helps you, quickly find alternatives and ways of getting there, and being able to communicate out to your stakeholders what that impact is.
Definitely.
So here's a little, I always love Steve Covey. So we added this into this presentation. And I love this quote: "The leader is one who climbs the tallest tree, surveys the entire situation, and yells, 'Oops, wrong jungle,' while everybody busy, efficient producers and managers are often respond, 'Shut up, we're making progress.'" So what does that say to you, right? I mean, it's that North Star. Are we going in the direction we're supposed to be going? And as the project manager, your job is to get up into the treetops and make sure that we are heading in the right direction. So the challenge is there's going to be things that happen, and that you're going to have to pivot. And you're going to have to tell people, it's like, oh, time out. come back and we're going to go a slightly different way, maybe not a totally different way, but a slightly different way so we can continue to achieve the goals for the project. So there's a lot of things we can do to facilitate that. One of the first things I always say is refer to that charter early and often.
Mm-hmm.
Keep reminding people what our North Star is. People will forget over time. They get so busy in the weeds and they're working, finishing tasks, but they forget why they're working. So having that constant conversation with regard to, this task you're doing is supposed to deliver X. It's supposed to help improve the efficiency of Y. It's supposed to make, help me get to the finish line, 3 weeks sooner. I mean, whatever that objective is, that people have to keep that in mind. So your job is really to make sure we're constantly reminding people what that is. And I've said it a million times already today. I probably did say it a million times already today. The objectives are key, and there's different ways to get there, and you have to make sure that everybody understands what that looks like. And they won't get it the first time. I hear that often is when somebody's doing a presentation, they go really fast and somebody's like really like quiet and not really understanding what's happening, but they just nod their head and they move on, and they really didn't get it, but they didn't speak up. So you have to repeat yourself multiple times. And every time I always remind myself, whenever somebody asks me a question 3 or 4 times, it's like, I've been thinking about this for a year. This person's been thinking about this for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's not ingrained in their mindset on what we're trying to accomplish or how to even achieve it. So everybody's going to process that data in a different way.
Yeah, and sometimes I think resources get stuck, people doing the tasks get wrapped up in their individual part of a project, and then they need to step back sometimes, because if your people that are doing the tasks know what their main goal is, they can alert you to problems. If they're only thinking about what their little part is, you're way less likely to get some help from your team.
Right. Absolutely.
With that.
Yeah.
So basically lift your team members to the top of the tree, or you take your camera and show them all the pictures, basically.
Right? Right. Absolutely. Well, and again, it's like staying connected and transparent.
Yeah.
We are not perfect. We never will be perfect. Right. And you've got all these different stakeholders. So our job is to help them all succeed.
Yeah.
Right. So whether it's the client, whether it's your own team member, it's about helping them succeed. And that needs to be the mindset versus dismissing them. So our job is communication. Everything we're doing, everything we do is communicate. And guess what? You might have to say it a million times.
Well, I think, remember, we had earlier in one of our much earlier webinars talked about just making sure that people know it's okay to not succeed, and to say, hey, sometimes people want to save too much face or whatever and be like, no, I have it. And then they don't have it.
Yeah.
And it's not if the culture of your project is that, hey, this is okay for you to tell us right away, nothing wrong with it, you didn't do anything wrong, then they're more likely to give you that information that you need. Because the worst thing I think is, again, not just getting surprised by your own team, because then you have to go tell the executives, and it gets complicated.
Yeah, and an easy way to do that is to allow questions.
Yeah.
I see oftentimes people get so busy that when somebody asks them a question, they're kind of dismissive. They like, you should know that. Well, no, and the more you can allow questions. And again, there's ways, like, you don't want to necessarily take up half an hour of a 20-person meeting for one question. There's ways to kind of move those off and have those, discussions offline. But if you don't allow questions, you don't allow people to really understand where we're going, you are going to have problems. And so that's, that's super important to do as a project manager. And like we said earlier, scheduling software, your software should be telling you when to worry, and our job is to worry without everybody else knowing it's worry. um, we're supposed to be the calm one and recognize that things do happen and help figure out ways to adjust and adapt and pivot when necessary, but let the tools do the work for you. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier about validating those results. So if we're really staying focused on the objectives, how can you confirm throughout the project that we are tracking in the right direction? That's where I think Agile has a lot of benefits there, because you're doing your demos and your retrospectives and you're replanning every sprint. That's definitely a positive from an Agile perspective. Agile tends to take it a little longer, and sometimes you see more scope creep. But how can you continue to validate against the objectives that we're accomplishing what we want to accomplish?
And one of the ways and we didn't really talk about this earlier, but one of the ways that they can do that in our tool now is with the new meeting minutes feature, you can log your, when you're having your status updates for your meetings, you can log that right with the project. So then when you go to archive it, the project, it'll all be connected. So, because the thing about your project plan, no matter what software you're using, whether it's desktop software or something online, it's always kind of telling you where you are right now. And so doing the meeting minutes where you log that can give you that, especially for a real long project, can give you that, well, here's where we were in January, here's where we were in February, or, should be every week or every 2 weeks or something like that. But if you log that, then you have that documentation that goes with it.
Yeah, metrics are super important, and sharing those with the team on a regular basis is super important, because that gets them motivated, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. And this one here is address only variations that warrant it. What might be something that doesn't warrant it? It's like, it would be if our goal is to improve efficiency of a process and the validated results weren't quite what we expected, but it's really not hurting the efficiency goals, do you need to address it? Do you need to fix it? It just depends. Maybe one of the other tasks got us even farther ahead than we expected. So you don't want to respond to every change. You want to respond to the changes that actually require it, that help you move the ball forward.
Right. Yeah.
And deprioritize those things that you find, again, remember we said we're assuming things, and we're assuming that, the 4 items that we're going to do is going to help us achieve those objectives. Maybe one of them you decide, not going to go there. So do you have to finish it? No. If it's not going to help you get there, lower the priority, put it back in the backlog, say, hey, we'll bring that back up. It's not going to help us achieve what we're trying to get to. And it's just busy work if we do just try to finish it off. So these are things to think about as you're going along, and, there's always options to respond to something.
Yeah, and you're going to want to keep reassessing that. And I think we talked about that in one of the prior sessions too, is that these things change as you go. What's hot, what's not. That's going to be very fluid, especially nowadays.
One of the things that I can picture that in like a UI or a UX rebranding of a application. You're thinking, hey, if I make it look like this and I put the sections, the blocks in this way, everybody's going to love it. And then you go test with users and they say, ooh, that's not going to work. So you made an assumption,
right?
You validated, you tested your assumption. The results came back not acceptable. So guess what? Put it aside. Try the next thing, right? So often we try to deliver every single thing we thought about, but it really comes down to, am I achieving the goals of what we're trying to achieve? All right. And so here's one of my favorite ones is everybody loves to start projects. Awesome. get kickoff, everybody's excited. And then the longer the projects go on, the harder it is to close. And why is that? Why is that? Because
Well, I think one of the reasons is people get pulled from the next, they get pulled off. You're done, but not all the way. And then there's another big project. So you just totally shift your whole team's attention. It's one thing that happens.
Yeah. And I'm of the opinion, if I'm not closing projects, I mean, there's one valid reason to not close a project, because it's no longer a valid project. If it's not, you can close a project, and just stop it. But those that just linger and linger is, in my opinion, demoralizing, demotivating to anybody that's on that project. So the longer they last, the harder it is to keep people moving it forward. So I'm always trying to figure out, okay, if we said we're going to try to get it done by the end of the first quarter, and it looks like it's dragging out for reasons that might be valid, you still want to try to close it and get it done. Because you want people want to go on to the next one, because that's more fun. And it's hard to close because people do get distracted. Like you said, Steve, they go off on, they're working on multiple projects. They like this one better than this one. So they're spending more of their time over here. So there are distractions. So how, as a project manager, can you keep people focused, delivering? And this is, agile, sprint methods and stuff do help that, focus on this. Let's get this done. Let's get this off the plate. Budgets, if we start running over budget, then it's even harder to try to get, some commitment for resources and things. So it's really hard to get those projects closed when they start going over budget. Right. And then the other thing is, a lot of times I see they'll get 80% of the project done, 90% of the project done. And then there's a couple remaining items, and they're little. And so they never seem to bubble up into the priority list, even in a sprint world. That's like, it's a small little task that we'll do that later. If you keep doing that, you're just going to continue to delay your project. So even some of the small things need to get the top priority and get them off the plate. Sometimes even like going into a meeting, if I'm going to have a meeting and I have, let's say 5 things to talk about, and one of them's a really difficult conversation, I tend to do the first 4 easy ones, get them off the plate, done, make the decision, move on, and then spend the rest of the meeting on that harder one. Because then I know I've gotten 4 off my plate. I'm going to talk about this one. There's a chance that we don't finish that conversation in that meeting, and it's going to continue on. If I flipped it the other way and handled the hard one first, the next meeting I still have 5 things to talk about. So those 4 things just got delayed because I spent time on this more difficult one. So small doesn't mean small in importance. Easy doesn't mean, small and important. Easy doesn't mean that it's not important. So you have to look when you're getting close to the end, you have to look at all those tasks that are remaining, and every single one of them needs to ultimately bubble up to the top so you can close that project out in a timely manner. Go ahead. Then we can celebrate, right? Right. So we have some questions for the audience here. Traditionally we would celebrate throughout the project at major milestones. We would do things together at the end of the projects. We'd go out and have, a party or something like that when we were all co-located. Nowadays with AI, with remote work, I'm sure that the audience has a lot of different thoughts about how to celebrate throughout the project, and say thank you, because that personal attention is so important for that ongoing motivation. And so I want to know from the audience, what have they seen work? What have they seen not work?
It's really a great question. I mean, getting together is easy when everyone's in the same office, but nowadays a lot of companies have gone this hybrid model or have specific resources remote, and with all the specialization. Yeah, I mean, do you really want to give someone another Zoom meeting? I mean, that's the thing. We're all on the computer so much with that maybe isn't the best thing. Maybe you do like everyone, if depending on how big the project is and how big your budgets are, maybe you do actually go somewhere, you know, as a
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. And I even gave the example previous, not in this webinar, but it's like a couple months ago, I got thanked by a bot. And I'm like, I'm
Well,
like, it kind of turned me off, so it's like one of those things with all this technology. Maybe I'm getting too older here, but it just, that personal connection, the camaraderie that we get by working together, to me is important for me, but I'm not everybody.
all right.
Well, I think
Now Kendall says in
Kendall
there that
agrees.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
no,
exactly it. The public
she likes
post,
getting
right?
tagged. Yeah,
Yeah, public post on Teams.
and I think some of this is cultural because I'm Gen Xer and like whatever, you can tag me in the post, that's fine. Going to the pub with the team would be more fun for me than getting tagged in teams. But I really enjoy tagging people and giving them credit over the teams. I just personally think that that's like not enough, but uh, depending. But it's great to do that all the time if you're really encouraging everybody for doing and
Yeah,
recognize
maybe.
them on the public board in the company, right?
Yeah, and maybe the important thing is, just out of this conversation, is that everybody's a little bit different.
Oh yeah,
So take the time as the project manager to understand what makes people feel good and feel appreciated, because that's one of the main reasons people leave, is if they're not feeling appreciated. Figure out how your team likes to be appreciated.
right. And that's a major thing. I was just reading. I forget which publication, probably Fortune or Inc. They're just talking about that employee engagement's really down right now. And you have the people looking for the jobs that they don't actually have to work. So it's really important, I think, as leaders in your own company and project managers to take that time to recognize that the people helping you get your job done, whether it's through Teams or doing it in a regular. You don't have to have a special Zoom meeting. You can actually call someone out in a regular Zoom meeting when they do a great job. I think that's helpful. Looks like you
And
have another
Bree,
comment here.
yeah, and I was just reading it, and that works well if you don't overuse it.
Right.
So if it happens all the time, then it just kind of dilutes it. Or if you have 100 people in your organization and 20 people get recognized, I mean, it kind of dilutes it. So I being recognized in front of the executive, I think, is a good way to do it. Just to
Yeah,
be
definitely.
careful about how it can be diluted over time.
Yeah.
Change it up once in a while.
Well, I do think it's important if you have like this idea of a props or a tagging of people that it's not like so many times that when it really matters, it gets lost in all of that. I think that's where you're going with that. So, it should be for job well done, not just the basics of a job, but there's a fine balance between all
Mhm.
that. It's not easy to do.
Absolutely.
Karen had mentioned happy hours, and I think actual like
I'm down
virtual
with that.
happy hours. Well, like we're talking remote, right? So I think virtual is a good way to do it too, because you can even like, what's the budgetary restraint on your 10 people to send them a $10 gift card to buy a coffee, and then you all share it at the same time and just kind of do that, or share a lunch virtually. Like, it's not ideal, but at least it's there are
Yeah.
different ways you can connect with your team kind of
Yeah.
out of the box.
And I think the point in this webinar here is that, don't just wait till the end.
Right.
Say
Yeah.
thank you, when people do something that you appreciate, for the project, right? Say thank you, figure out, different ways to do it, mix it up a bit, find out what, makes people tick. I mean, that's never changed. It's just the whole remoteness has changed.
Mhm.
And, how can we get, when all the Zoom started and we weren't doing our videos, that was fine. But then over time and through COVID and stuff, it was like, oh, the videos were at least some way to see somebody's face. It still was hard to recognize people.
Yeah.
Long term, we didn't build the relationship quite the same way, but it's getting more used to it, I
Yeah,
guess.
and we had another audience one that said sometimes, this gets back to knowing who your people are.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the thank you is one-on-one and not in front of everybody for certain people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's important to know who is motivated by what. That's not easy to find out, especially if let's say you're doing a project with people that you're just meeting, because that happens all the time in projects where you're working with new individuals. You maybe don't really know them very well, and it takes a little time. So,
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, which I didn't even have in this webinar, is throughout the project. To keep
right,
things running smoothly, you got to get to know your team,
yeah,
some way, shape, or form. And it's not a group chat. It's probably more of a one-on-one chat or a telephone call or a Zoom. Just get to know them.
yeah, definitely, that helps.
All right. So we are using up our whole time here, which is great. So the last thing I just want to talk about is a little bit about closure. Even though we finish the project, you may not be able to prove that you've achieved all the objectives yet. And I know this is really small, but you guys can look at it and zoom in on it. But I think it's really important to communicate at the end of the project reiterating what the objectives are, hand off to the team that's going to take it to actually see the results of that, especially if you're talking about any kind of efficiencies or anytime just implementing Project Insight. Somebody didn't have a project management software tool before, now they have Project Insight, they went through a whole implementation. Who's picking up that baton to actually prove that the efficiency is better, right? You want to have some of that. So somebody's going to be getting that baton passed to them, and having that communication at the end of the project is really important, and know where that's going. In my world, we implement a lot of software, and it ends up being operational people that need to give us feedback later on about how is the tool working. And so there has to be that continuous review, continuous improvement on that project. But again, I know I'm a broken record. What were we trying to achieve? Are we achieving it? So people will always forget. Things get implemented, and then all of a sudden you hear, well, the tool's not doing what we expected it to do. Well, did it? What is the expectation? And a lot of times, that just gets miscommunicated in the handoff.
Hmm.
So it's really important for any project team to have a transition to operations, expectation. Plan on making sure you're handing it off to the next group that's going to actually, do that next step with that implementation. And keep that connection so that the team can get feedback. If your team that does all the implementations never gets feedback, you're never going to know whether or not you're going to assume everything you've always done worked well. And maybe
Yeah.
that's not the case. And plan for, having some time to wrap up any open items and things like that. And we probably have all been on projects where we've implemented something and we had 3 or 4 workarounds because we didn't get to it. Are we finishing those off? Are we really completing those things? Are we getting to the expectations that we wanted? So again, it goes beyond the project. And a lot of times when I teach project management, they're like, well, I'm not involved. I said,
Hmm.
but you should want to be still involved, at least keep an ear out or connect with the people that are doing the operational part of it, and validate that you've actually gotten where you needed to go.
Definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes that might be, you might close the project out and still have another follow up months away, because certain things you can't tell, you won't know for a while for
Right.
certain things.
Right. And I always see a handful of things sitting over there on the side, and we'll get to it. And then that whole conversation about it's in the backlog and
Yeah, the sprint priority.
And they stay low, they stay low.
Ugh.
You know what? We never finish that. Let's wrap that up. Let's get that to the top. We believe that it's going to really improve the efficiency, that last little bit that client's looking for. So having that diligence on closing those last items is really important. And I can't stress it enough, because it never ends up bubbling up to a priority item if it's just put in the backlog. Almost guarantee it. So you as the project manager just work to try to close those things out as quickly as you can, even after implementation, so that you have a happy client, and that's the goal, right? That happy client. So that is our session for today, and we didn't run out of time.
Oh, I know, right?
Well played.
We did it on time.
Any questions? Please use the chat if you do have any. Obviously, that's been open the whole time, though.
Yes, it has.
Yep.
But this was fun, guys. I mean, it's knowing the basics of managing a project, and your charter and your risk management and your stakeholder and analysis, your statusing, and all that stuff is important. But things will happen. Things will happen, and you need to be able to adapt and adjust and not get stressed out over it, because everybody else will.
Hey, go ahead and move to the PDU slide.
Yes, sir.
There you go. All right. And so just for everyone's reminder, I think you have to scan that and fill it out to get your PDU.
Use your
As
phone.
Matt's showing. And we will send out the reminder email with the video for those who are on the list of it, watch it after the fact. I believe I heard that we were going to put the link to all of the other prior ones too, so you just have one consolidated email there. And we're looking forward to moving on to the next set of topics to be determined. Yeah, right. We got the confirmation. The links are going to be shared.
We got the links coming.
Yeah, so November, we're going to do tips and tricks on the task list. That's not a PDU webinar, but then November 15th, we will have a PDU, and December 13th. We haven't determined the topic yet, but we will announce that and send it out in emails for everybody. December will be AI capacity planning and project insight again. All right, follow us on social media. Thank you very much, everybody.
It was great talking to everybody.
Thank you all.
Yep. See you in a month.
Yep.